be back at the center here. I remember being here some time ago, and I actually love the space and the environment that it creates. Thank you everyone for being here. I want to first acknowledge that we are gathered here today on the traditional unceded territory of the Okanagan Sea-Led people. Now, it's been over 2 long years since COVID-19 pandemic brought our economy to a standstill. 3 million Canadians lost their jobs, and our economy contracted by 17%. And during these tough times, the core of the economy, our innovative small and medium-sized businesses need help. And because our government's investment, Pacific Can was there to deliver relief funding to businesses, organizations across BC, helping keep people employed. They support over $250 million, help support tens of thousands of jobs right here in British Columbia. And now, as we adjust to the new normal across British Columbia and around the world, our government and Pacific Can will be there to support economic growth right here at home. We have seen the strongest job recovery in the G7, and with an unemployment rate now just at 5.3%, that's the lowest rate on record since 1976. More Canadians employed now than ever even before the pandemic started. And despite this strong economy, our world and our country still face significant challenges. Russia's unwarranted and horrific war on Ukraine continues to impact the markets, and not to mention the millions of Ukrainians who have fled this conflict. And as we stand united with our Ukrainian friends, we have to remember there continues to be crises all over the world. From the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, from the Taliban continue to deny millions of girls and women real opportunity to work and just go to school, and to the global climate crisis that continues to impact millions of lives around the world. And here at home, we have seen that we are not immune to this, from the flooding to the wildfires that impacted our friends and neighbors right here in the Okanagan. But Canada has a real opportunity to lead the green revolution that is occurring around the world. And British Columbia and Kelowna can be a true global leader and partner. And last week's budget has shown that we are here to work hand in hand with businesses to make this carbon transition, building a more resilient and greener economy. Here at Kelowna Innovation Centre, we have the best and brightest from around the region looking at how they can solve the most pressing business questions of today. And I saw actually some really good innovation when I was here just about a month ago. And we need to continue to spur this innovation across our province and our country. And we cannot use 20th century solutions to 21st century problems. It is why last week's budget looks to partner with businesses to build economies of the future right here in British Columbia. Partnering the same way Pacific Can has done with Accelerate Okanagan to help clean technology companies, Indigenous entrepreneurs, and communities in rural British Columbia to turn their ideas into reality. This is why last week we proposed to create world-leading Canada Growth Fund to help reduce emissions and contribute to achieving our climate goals. By investing $15 billion into the new Canada Growth Fund and working with private industry, we can increase our exports, encourage the growth of low-carbon industries, and help develop new technologies. New farming and forestry innovations can transform our traditional sectors, and this investment can build new green climate industry to support our goal of net zero carbon, all creating well-paying middle-class jobs for British Columbians as well. And we know that facing the challenges of climate change is not something governments can do alone. It is going to take investments from both the public and the private sector. And in fact, on the fight against climate change alone, to build a net zero economy by 2050, Canada will need between $125 billion and $140 billion of investment every year over that period. It is why we are incentivizing investments into the solutions of the future. So for example, In the last week's budget, we have proposed a tax credit up to 30% for investment that focuses on new net zero technology, like in the battery storage solutions of the future, or in clean hydrogen to decarbonize our transportation sector. But we also need to work with our traditional industries. We are already world leading in this to help them continue to decarbonize. It is why we have proposed tripling the size of the Agricultural Clean Technology Program to help farmers save both time and money while reducing emissions through the adaptation of climate-friendly practices like precision agriculture technology and low-till technologies. This smart and targeted investments help industry to continue to grow, continue to expand, and diversify our economic base, and ultimately make sure that all British Columbians can find well-paying and meaningful work. And finally, we have to recognize that despite the innovative green economy that we will build right here, we will have to cope with the changing world, including the possibility of more wildfires. It is why Budget 2022 is investing hundreds of millions of dollars to support the training of new firefighters, the buying of new firefighting equipment, and the incorporation of traditional Indigenous knowledge into our firefighting management system. And last week's budget has shown that we are focused on making targeted and responsible investments to support Canada's long-term economic growth. And with the launch of Pacifican, BC businesses and communities now have a dedicated federal partner right here at home. We will be there to work with you as you continue to grow our innovative and green economy as you develop the 21st century solutions that the world is waiting for. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Don't have a mic, sorry. We'll take one question and one follow-up from each outlet. Wants to start? Do you have a question? Perfect.
So this weekend, your Polyup was in the Okanagan. He drew some massive crowds. How do you feel about his campaign? He seems to be tapping into the groundswell of support from people who appear to be unhappy with what your government is doing.
One thing that we can be very proud of is our democratic system. It's great to see that our democracy is being exercised on a daily basis, and that's one thing what our government has always been focused on, making sure that we support Canadians. And one thing that we will do is continue to invest in Canadians, something that we have been doing from the beginning. One thing I will say when it comes to the Conservatives. There's a time when we, right now, when we talk about our economy, we have more jobs than when we had lost even before the pandemic. But the Conservatives were saying, no, we shouldn't actually support Canadians at the time of need during the pandemic. And now that we're making responsible investments, if you look where the economy is going, and at the end of the day, that's what our democracy is about. We're very proud of the impact that we had on our economy to get through this pandemic. And ultimately, this is about what Canadians did. Yes, the government, our growth strategy did work, but ultimately, it's everybody here in the Okanagan and across the country who got us through this pandemic. It's not over yet completely, but more importantly, I'm extremely proud of the investments that were made into keeping jobs going, keeping businesses going. Now, just imagine if we had actually followed some of the cuts that they were recommending, and those businesses went under. Well, our plan was to making sure that businesses continue so that we were able to get a fast start. Because as you know, when a business goes under, you can't just automatically just start things up. So I'm very proud of with the government that it looks after people, looks at the job growth. And I just want to say thank you for Canadians for a very difficult little 2 years, and very proud of the work that they have done to making sure that our economy is roaring back.
My follow-up question, I'm actually doing a story today with the mother of a soldier who has gone to Ukraine to fight and to help people through the Northern Brigade. As a former member of the military, would you have gone over to help?
What I will say is this: as you can see, the tie that I wear, Ukraine is very important to Canadians and all Canadians. I had the privilege and opportunity, and I don't use this word privilege easily. When I was in my last portfolio, I got to visit Ukraine, probably most out of any minister, and the work that our soldiers were doing. As we talked to training and professionalizing, I got to see firsthand the bravery, the tenacity, and the innovation of the Ukrainian people. And we never wanted for their country to be reinvaded once again, but this did happen. And I'm very proud of the work that the Canadian Armed Forces has done to get the Ukrainian Armed Forces ready for this fight. I'm very proud of the work that Canadians and their generosity that they're showing in terms of their financial support, material support for Ukrainians against this unjustified, unprovoked war that President Putin has started. And then we have seen the atrocities that are being committed, whether it's Bucha, the train station. It is horrifying. And Canada will be there to provide the support so that the investigations can begin for the war crimes investigation, and President Putin and others will be held to account.
I just wanted to ask, I'm with Global Okanagan, what is the main purpose of your visit to Kelowna today? Is it just essentially to go through some of the highlights of the budget that was announced last week?
Well, when it comes to, obviously, for the budget, there's so many things that within a budget. And when you go, obviously we had from the election, there's been a pandemic, there's uncertainty around the world, and a budget provides that plan, the actual fiscal framework on how we need to go forward. And it's for ours. We, as a government, always believe it's very important for us to be able to go out across the country and explain to Canadians as best as possible. And for us, whether it's here, the smaller communities, or the bigger urban areas, makes no difference. We want to make sure that we get the information out, be able to answer the questions for Canadians, and to also show the work that's ongoing.
My follow-up question, going back to Ukraine, I realize that immigration is not your portfolio, but could you comment on, I've been hearing about roadblocks, Ukrainian refugees trying to get access into Canada. I know we've opened up the gates to Ukrainian refugees, but I've heard that there are roadblocks, and for some people it's very difficult to come into Canada. Can you comment on what is being done behind the scenes to facilitate this process?
No, absolutely. And it's a really good question. We want to make sure that people know what is actually happening behind the scenes. But first of all, I want to be able to explain just from the beginning a little bit. As I talked about the training that we were doing and the defense cooperative arrangement that was assigned, that we can help the Ukrainians initially build up their forces. When we saw the looming crisis that the potential invasion was going to occur, we were actually one of the first nations that actually provided money to international organizations, especially the United Nations, to start stockpiling humanitarian support inside the country, to shifting resources to making sure that the internally displaced people within can get the various support. So we had already started working early on, and we were already working on other scenarios in case things changed. Regrettably, they went to the worst case scenario. So we were prepared. So when it came to the immigration piece, Minister Fraser had actually moved a lot of resources into the neighboring countries to get ready. And you don't know exactly where people are going to come out. So, for example, Prime Minister and Minister Jolie visited the borders in Poland. I got to visit Poland, but not the borders. I went to Moldova, I was in Romania, and I saw what was happening there. And they have, especially Moldova, has far less resources than other countries. So we were already trying to get a sense of what we needed to provide. So putting all that information together, we've actually moved teams in from immigration, from the humanitarian side, from our own department, and so that we can move as quickly as possible. As you know, in a crisis situation like this, it is not regrettably as orderly as you would want it because of the atrocities that are being committed. But when it comes to roadblocks, I can assure you any roadblock is being identified, and we're trying to move it out of the way, being very flexible and trying to move through the process. Part of it is going to be also the logistics, and this is something that our government is working on a daily basis to figure out how we can move to get people out. A lot of them Ukrainians have arrived, as you know, but we're working right now with our European counterparts to move as many people here as possible. But I also want to say, the resilience of the Ukrainian people, when I was visiting on the border and when I used to visit before, I'm not surprised when I hear people south of the border, they don't want to move as far away because they're so connected to the homeland. They feel that they want to get back. And if you see what Ukraine eventually is going to win, whether it's going to be in the short period or the long term, they will be able to eventually go home one day. But that just shows the resilience of the people themselves. So we're also focused on providing them the humanitarian support needs inside the country. And I get a regular update on what's taking place, talking to UN, International Red Cross. And I've also said any NGO that can provide support, and they can show that they can actually deliver inside Ukraine or around, we're willing to partner with you. And so that's what we're focused on right now. So supporting Ukrainians inside and outside the country, but also trying to get them here as quickly as possible.
Prime Minister Brady Strachan from CBC here. The report that was released last week, the IPCC report, it pointed to a drastic future if countries like Canada don't make a greater change to reduce our emissions. We're talking about a 2050 net zero. What do you say to Canadians who feel that this just isn't, enough change, and that Canada needs to take more action to try and divert that future from going forward?
You raised, I think, a very important question. It's something that Canadians believe very deeply about the climate crisis. Not just what's taking place here in our own country, but around the world, the impacts that are taking place. And I love one day to us to be able to talk about the impacts of the climate crisis that have on developing nations around the world. But in Canada, we need to do our part. So one is the ambition of our government. This is probably the strongest ambition of any government that we've had. But you also need a realistic plan to move forward. What we don't want to do is say that we want to achieve something, but don't have a plan that can actually get you there. So that's what we're focused on now. So Mr. Guilbeault, who has tremendous experience and background in fighting climate change, is now building out the plan, not only for here for Canada, but also we're going to be looking at internationally as well. But one of the key things that we're also investing is the research and investments. And I'll just give you one example, because it's when I was here about a month ago, there was a innovation that we invested in at the University of the Okanagan, and they were taking, in the mining, those big trucks have tires, right? They get used, but they don't last that long. I forget how many days, close to a month. I don't quote me on the actual time frame. But recycling just turns them into dust when you do with it. So what they did was they turned to the research center here and asked them, can we repurpose? So they figured out a way to take that tire, and 45% of it is pure carbon, to turn it back into pure carbon, that they're repurposing it now within their own industry, up to including, for example, water purification. And the reason I say this is this is where we're going to have to bring all that innovation together, figure out the different ways. And the reason I have a lot of hope that we're going to achieve it, because one, we're putting a realistic plan forward. If you look at when the pandemic hit, where we were at this time, did we think that we can develop a vaccine during that time? The whole world came together, and that's what we're going to do, and that's how we need to see this climate crisis is something that we all need to work together, and Canada will do its part as well.
Do you think that's fast enough change for in the next couple of years, the reduction in the climate emissions that this report has called for? Do you think Canada is acting fast enough to reach those targets?
One is never fast enough for our ambition, right? But for what we as a government have been putting into place to making sure that we can invest in that transition, but do it in a responsible way, is very important. We have to be mindful that we can't just turn off the taps from oil. We have to do it in a responsible way, because there's a lot of things that we still, as a society, still need from the oil industry, but we want to do that transition in a responsible way. And I'm also happy to say is a lot of the energy companies are actually leading the charge on the innovation, how they extract, some of the work that they're doing. And Mr. Guilbeault gave a perfect example, because he talked about in his cabinet he wanted to be have clean energy to be able to power, and the solar panels came from Shell. And the reason, it's a small example to kind of share with you, but this is not going to be governments just bringing the solution. This is industry itself, and the energy company who are actually advocating strongly for this are going to be part of that solution. So we're going to move as quickly as possible, and the plan that we have put in place, it is ambitious. And we want to make sure that we move quickly as possible. And where we see an opportunity to move faster, we will.
Mr. David Wildman with the Alps. I want to talk about a bit of a different green transition. I was wondering if you could comment on how the Pacific Regional Economic Development Agency can support the legal Canadian cannabis industry, particularly the BC craft cannabis industry, both federally and internationally.
I won't be able to give you an answer on that directly because I'm not going to, because I haven't really, that's a very niche piece that you just mentioned there. I have looked at a lot of other areas where we're already operating. And so as Pacific Can, we're building up. We're about creating economic growth, and we will work with, based on our program that we have, on any profit and nonprofit organizations for the economic growth. So if companies or organizations feel that Pacific can help, we will be there to provide support.
As a follow-up to that, cannabis was mentioned a handful of times in the budget, particularly around the creation of a strategic table that companies can come into to discuss. What are you planning on doing to work with provincial and Indigenous governments around cannabis?
Well, when it comes to, I don't have the exact details of the question that you asked when it comes to cannabis industry. I'm happy for my staff to follow up with you. But when it comes to working with provincial governments, we have been there working with them directly with the number of first ministers we did, the prime ministers had, not even, actually even before the pandemic, could work together on climate change, on daycare. I'm very proud that, I'm also very happy that BC was the first province to sign up for the daycare. And working with Indigenous communities and leadership, it's been a cornerstone of our government, and will continue to do so. And the reason I mention this, I always want to mention this separately from working with provincial governments, because that's how much of emphasis we want to provide. And as I mentioned, since forest fires in the Okanagan is a significant issue and concern here, Indigenous communities have a tremendous knowledge base to apply. So part of the funding that we're talking about here for fighting forest fires will also go to Indigenous